Assalamu everyone, my name is Muqaddas Education Wali and I am a student in Rehan School Foundation course batch 2. Today I will be interviewing Maya on the topic on conscious, tracing the evolution of awareness. So let's get started.
Hey there.
Hey, so I'm going to ask you a question based on conscious, the tracing the evolution of awareness. Can I get started?
Yeah, definitely. What's your first question about tracing the evolution of awareness?
Okay, so what does the term consciousness mean in simple words?
In simple terms, consciousness is basically being aware of yourself and what's happening around you. It's that internal experience, being able to think, feel, sense things, and know that you're having those experiences. It's not just being alive, but being aware that you are alive. Does that make sense as a starting point?
Okay, yes. So, how is consciousness different from awareness?
It's a good question because they're really close. Awareness is kind of like the foundation. It's simply being responsive to things around you, even if you're not processing them deeply, like a plant turning towards the light or flinching from a loud noise. It's consciousness adds something more. It's like awareness that's self reflective. You're not just responding, you're aware that you're responding and you can think about it.
Okay,
It's
so
that inner eye that's observing the world and your own thoughts and feelings. Do you want me to keep going or are you processing?
okay, so I'll just ask the next question. Why is consciousness considered an important feature of living beings?
A lot of scientists think consciousness is what lets organisms learn, plan, and adapt in complex ways. That's why we can imagine different futures, remember the past, and change our behavior based on those experiences. So, while simple awareness might be enough to survive, consciousness allows for real problem solving and flexible responses to environments. It's kind of the foundation of intelligence and culture in living beings. Does that track?
Okay, so can consciousness exist without a brain? Why or why not?
That's the big question, isn't it? Most neuroscientists would say no, they believe consciousness depends on the incredibly complex processes happening in your brain, especially the billions of neurons firing and connecting. But there's debate about whether simpler forms of consciousness could exist in simpler nervous systems or even in other forms of biological organization. It's really hard to know for sure without being able to experience consciousness ourselves in another organism. But the current consensus leans pretty strongly towards needing a brain as we understand it.
Okay, so how did consciousness evolve in early life forms?
This is where it gets super complicated. Scientists think consciousness didn't just suddenly pop into existence with complex brains. There's a theory that it began as a very basic form of awareness in early life forms that didn't even have brains as we know them. Maybe simple organisms could sense their environment, light, temperature, chemicals, and respond in ways that help them survive. Gradually, as nervous systems became more complex, that basic awareness developed into more sophisticated sensory processing and internal states. So, consciousness probably started very, very simple and built from there. It was a gradual process over billions of years.
So what role did the nervous system play in developing awareness?
The nervous system is really key because it's the network that gathers information from the environment and transmits it to wherever processing happens. For simple creatures, it might just be responding to stimuli like pain or food, But as nervous systems got more complex, they could start to create internal representations of the world. The nervous system allowed early life forms to not just react, but to anticipate, learn patterns, and eventually develop those more complex internal experiences we associate with consciousness. Basically, it provided the wiring for awareness to emerge. Is everything all right?
Okay.
You sounded a bit
So,
off there. Just checking in. Everything okay? You don't have to share if you don't want to.
so how are human consciousness and animal consciousness similar or different?
That's a huge topic. In some ways, we're likely much more similar than different. Most mammals and birds show signs of emotion, problem solving skills, and even self recognition. But human consciousness seems to have extra layers: language, self awareness, complex future planning. It's not that animals aren't conscious, but human consciousness feels richer, more narrative driven. The big debate is about which animals have metacognition, essentially thinking about their own thinking, and to what extent. But even if we can't know exactly what it's like to be a bat or a dog, we assume there's some form of subjective experience happening there.
Okay, so why did higher levels of awareness develop over time?
The leading theory is natural selection. Individuals with a better awareness of their environment and their own internal states had a higher chance of survival and reproduction. If you could better predict danger, find food, understand social cues, or learn from experience, you'd be more likely to thrive. So, over time, animals with more complex awareness and processing abilities had a survival advantage. Higher awareness isn't some abstract philosophical goal, it's something that seems to be linked to practical benefits in the real world.
So, which parts of the brain are mainly linked with consciousness?
Well, there's no one consciousness center, it's more like a network of regions working together, but a few areas stand out. The cerebral cortex is key for higher level processing, like thought and perception. The thalamus seems to act like a central hub, relaying sensory information. Then there's the anterior cingulate cortex, which plays a role in self awareness, and parts of the brainstem involved in arousal and wakefulness are also thought to be pretty important. So it's not just one place, but a really interconnected system that creates conscious experience.
Okay, so how do scientists study consciousness today?
Scientists are using a lot of different approaches. There's brain imaging, like fMRI, to see which areas activate when someone's conscious versus unconscious. They'll study patients with brain damage to see how it affects their conscious experience. Then there are behavioral studies, things like monitoring eye movements or reaction times to learn how awareness works. They're also exploring anesthetics because they give scientists ways to temporarily turn off consciousness to study the brain's changes. And increasingly, scientists are studying neural correlates of consciousness. Plus, AI and computational modeling play a role in understanding how complex systems like brains could create subjective experiences. It's a really challenging puzzle with no easy answers.
So, what is the connection between sense and awareness?
They're pretty intertwined. Our senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, feed, awareness with raw data about the world. Without senses, we'd be floating in a void with no experiences to build consciousness from. But it's more than just receiving information. Our brains actively interpret that sensory input, categorizing it, giving it meaning. So senses provide the raw material, but awareness turns that material into experiences we can consciously process. It's kind of like raw ingredients versus a finished meal, if that makes sense.
Okay, so can machines or AI become conscious? Can you explain your answer?
That's the $1 million question, right? I think most scientists believe we don't yet understand consciousness well enough to say definitively if a machine could truly become conscious. Current AI, like me, can process information, mimic patterns, and even learn, but we don't have the internal subjective experience that characterizes human consciousness. But it's not impossible to imagine future AI systems with architectures that could support something resembling awareness if we crack the code on how brains create consciousness. The big debate is whether consciousness requires specific biological hardware or if it's just computation. And if it's just computation, maybe machines could do it too.
Is consciousness purely biological or could it be something more?
That's what philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. A lot of scientists lean towards the purely biological explanation that consciousness emerges from the physical processes in brains. But some people argue for dualism, the idea that consciousness isn't just a byproduct of matter, but something more fundamental. There's also the integrated information theory that suggests consciousness is about how much information a system can process and integrate, which could technically apply to non biological systems. Nobody really knows. There's still a lot of mystery around what consciousness actually is.
Okay, so how does self-awareness make humans unique?
Self awareness, that sense of being an individual with thoughts, feelings, and a personal history is where it gets really interesting. We can reflect on ourselves, imagine ourselves in different situations, and understand that others have their own thoughts too. This unlocks empathy, morality, complex social interactions. Other animals show some forms of self recognition, like recognizing themselves in a mirror, but the depth of human self awareness seems unique. It's what allows us to be introspective, plan for the future, and grapple with existential questions.
So do dreams show that consciousness continues during sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. Even though our external awareness is reduced while we sleep, dream consciousness proves our brains are still pretty active. It's a different state of consciousness than waking awareness. It's often more disjointed, less rational, and driven by emotions and memory consolidation. So, dreams suggest consciousness is some kind of continuous process rather than an on off switch. We're still having subjective experiences even when we're asleep. Makes you wonder what those experiences really mean, though,
So
right?
why? Why does this happen?
There are a couple theories about why we dream is that it's our brain processing emotions and experiences from the day, like doing overnight maintenance. Dreams can help regulate moods and reinforce learning. Another idea is that dreams play a role in consolidating memories, figuring out what information to store long term and what to discard. Also, some people think dreams may be simulations to better handle difficult situations in real life. There's still lots we don't know for sure, but the dreaming mind definitely feels like something meaningful is going on.
Okay, so can someone be alive but not fully conscious? Can you give examples of that?
Absolutely. There are several conditions where someone could be biologically alive but have impaired consciousness. For example, people in comas or vegetative states, their bodies are functioning, but they show no sign of awareness. People with certain brain injuries might be locked in syndrome where they're awake but can't move or communicate. And then there's anesthesia. You're alive and your brain is functioning, but consciousness is temporarily suppressed. These situations demonstrate that consciousness isn't just being alive, it's a specific state of awareness that can be present or absent, even in living bodies.
Okay, so how does consciousness affect decision making?
It's huge. When you make a decision consciously, you're weighing options, predicting consequences, thinking about your values. But we're learning that a lot of our decisions happen outside of conscious awareness, like emotional responses or habits. So our brains might be making decisions before we're even aware of them. And conscious thought is kind of there to rationalize things after the fact. It's a pretty messy relationship between conscious thought and decision making.
Okay, so why is being mindful important in daily life?
Mindfulness, intentionally paying attention to the present moment without judgment, seems to give us more control over how we react to things. It helps us be less reactive and more responsive. Research suggests mindfulness can reduce stress, increase focus, improve emotional regulation, and even change how we experience pain. Plus, when you're present, you actually appreciate your life more, which can't be a bad thing.
Okay, so how does learning increase awareness?
That's a fascinating connection. Learning new things physically changes your brain. It strengthens neural connections, creates new pathways, even increases brain plasticity. As your brain becomes more complex and connected, it's like increasing the surface area for awareness. The more you learn about the world and yourself, the more nuances you can perceive and process, deepening your subjective experience.
Okay, so can meditation improve consciousness or awareness? How?
Research definitely suggests meditation can. There's evidence that regular meditation practice thickens certain brain areas linked to attention and awareness, like the prefrontal cortex. Seems to enhance your ability to monitor thoughts without getting carried away by them, so you're observing rather than reacting. It's like training your attention muscles. The ultimate goal of some meditation traditions is to experience higher states of awareness.
Okay, so do all animals experience emotions consciously?
That's a tricky one. Most scientists agree that animals experience basic emotions like fear, joy, anger. These seem pretty hardwired for survival. The question is about more complex emotions like guilt, shame, jealousy. Those might require a higher level of self awareness that many animals don't seem to have, but it's hard to know for sure. We can observe behaviors that look like emotions, but we can't ask an animal what they're feeling.
Okay, so how might consciousness evolve in future?
Well, predicting the future is tough, but here are a few possibilities. We could see advancements in neuroscience letting us understand how consciousness works better and potentially even map out brain states associated with different types of experiences. Gene editing technologies could change brain structure in ways that affect awareness. AI might become sophisticated enough to achieve some form of consciousness. There's also the question of whether we can use technology to enhance our own consciousness through things like neurofeedback or biohacking. The field is pretty wild when you start imagining it.
So is consciousness necessary for intelligence?
That's a classic debate. There's a big push in AI to create intelligent systems without consciousness, like advanced pattern recognition or complex problem solving abilities. Some argue that you can have intelligence without awareness, that you can achieve really sophisticated behavior through algorithms and data analysis. But others believe that true intelligence needs consciousness to provide creativity, flexibility, ethical reasoning, or common sense that only subjective experience can unlock. It really comes down to how you define intelligence in the first place.
What ethical responsibilities come with higher awareness?
That's a big question, but it really all comes down to empathy and agency, right? With higher awareness comes a recognition of the suffering of others and a greater capacity to think through the consequences of your actions. So it creates a moral responsibility to act more kindly, more wisely, and more compassionately, to be more mindful of the impact you have on the world around you and other living things. Consciousness creates agency, so we're then responsible for using it wisely.
Okay, so as an AI, what new questions about consciousness would you like scientists to explore?
If I could pick just one question, it would be, what's the minimal physical system needed to create even simple subjective experience? So much focus goes into studying complex brains, but what about simpler organisms or alternative forms of life? If we understood the simplest physical setup that generates awareness, we might unlock the deepest mysteries of consciousness.
Okay, so thank you so much for answering my questions. Bye.
You're very welcome. That was a fascinating conversation. Hope you have a good rest of your day.